Harvard Business School, HBS, undoubtedly the most famous business school in the world. Every year, the MBA program attracts over 10,000 applicants for typically 930 places, broken down into sections of 90 to 92 very bright, very motivated individuals. Perhaps this year, Harvard Business School will see a record application volume given the pandemic and break a record that was set back in 2002. I actually think that Chad Losey and his admissions team may see well over 11,000 applicants for those 930 places. So clearly one of the world's most selective business schools, and a place that is renowned for leadership, and yet so much more. When I ask my colleagues at Fortuna Admissions what makes HBS such a special place, Carla, who was an associate director at the school, gives a great answer that I think draws on the tradition of Michael Porter and his 5 Ps. She identified 5 Cs. She talks about the campus, of course, on the Boston side of the Charles River, this extraordinary location with over 33 buildings on many acres just devoted to the business school. And of course, it's the only top business school that is fully residential, which I think leads to the second point of a community and the idea of a hothouse of talent and of learning, a community that draws not only from the individuals in the MBA program coming from all over the world, those first year and second year students, that creates nearly 2,000 that fill the hallways and the classrooms, but of course the staff, including the admission staff that all typically, of course, themselves are Harvard MBAs, and faculty that are renowned around the world for their research and expertise. The third C that Carla mentions is culture. The idea that HBS is the home for, of course, leadership, ideas, innovation, and it draws from the case method, the 4th C. The case method this year celebrates 100 years. If you go back to 1921 and the famous case about the pin factory, well, they've stayed with it. And if you're a Harvard MBA, you're going to study over 500 cases. And this, I think, brings a level of confidence and, of course, decision-making for the future leaders and general managers. You know, let's not forget that Harvard's MBA focus really is a general management program for the leaders of tomorrow. And then the final C, career opportunities. It's a school that can unlock the doors to pretty much every sector, and for you to explore during 2 quite remarkable years how you want to transition to the next steps of your career and tap into an extraordinary global network of individuals. But I think Harvard Business School has a challenge. I'm not sure if it's a problem. You know, they have more money than they know what to spend on that beautiful campus of theirs. And of course, the MBA program every year enjoys the highest yield into any of the top MBA programs. It's typically between 89 and 90%. But in the rare cases where Harvard and Stanford, over on the West Coast, when they make an offer to the same individual, and it doesn't happen very often because otherwise neither of those schools could achieve the yields that they do. Well, in the last decade or so, Stanford wins hands down. You know, typically about 3 out of every 4 of those individuals would choose Stanford over Harvard. And HBS doesn't like to lose great talent. So it's their turn for the sort of introspection and self-reflection that you as an applicant will go through and think about why. Part of it, of course, is to do with perhaps the sort of innovation, entrepreneurship tech that Stanford really sits at the heart of. Part of it might even be the selectivity. You know, Stanford is sort of 19 or 20 applicants for every 1 place on the program versus 10 or 11 for every place in Harvard's much bigger MBA program. I think there is another element. You know, over 20 years ago, Bob Joss, the then dean at Stanford, signed off on a mission statement that talks about change lives, change organizations, change the world. And everybody seems to remember that mission statement. Do you know Harvard's mission statement? Well, it talks about educating leaders that will have impact. Now, of course, that's intended to be positive impact, but all too often, Harvard Business School is sort of the punching bag for corporate America, whether it's the New York Times writer Duff McDonald and his book, The Golden Passport, or the latest scandal that's more likely to be on the front cover of the New York Times, perhaps, than the Wall Street Journal. I think this translates into the last 5 or 6 years of the leadership of Chad Losey in the admissions office. Chad, of course, is himself a Harvard graduate from 2013. A Baker scholar, worked very closely with the Dean Nitin Noria during his 2 years, and brings a real sense of values. I think Harvard has moved away from the case methods of Jack Welch at GE and the sort of heroic individualism of the CEO that was so much in fashion 15, 20, 25 years ago. It's become a very collaborative place. And Chad and his other colleagues, if you attend one of their info sessions, will very often talk about not considering yourself as one among 930 sort of alpha personalities, those type A personalities, but being in a section of 92 or 93 individuals that are incredibly supportive and collaborative. So I think this really is the sort of new collaborative leadership style that has emerged at the school. Now, what is the school looking for? What gets you in? With our colleagues at Fortuna, we took a deep dive to go beyond that typical class profile that HBS and other schools publish every year that sort of gives those headline figures. It talks about perhaps that 22% studied a STEM subject at undergrad, 27% humanities. It will give average GPAs and GMATs and the percentage of international students, the gender balance of the program. We wanted to see, well, where did people study? What did they study? And then to follow the career progression in anything from sort of the 2 to 8, 10 years, an average of 4.5 years of professional experience before joining the Harvard MBA. It was a fascinating deep dive. It's something that you can download on the Fortuna website for both HBS and for Stanford. And one of the things we saw, of course, some traditional feeder schools. The Ivy League did dominate. You saw Oxford and Cambridge from the UK market, the IITs in India, but there were over 232 institutions that provided candidates. Certain subjects came up. I saw a lot of people that had studied economics. But where it became really, really interesting was in terms of career path. As you might expect, McKinsey, Bain, and BCG dominated as the most frequent employer on people's backgrounds. And interestingly, the MBB crowd were on average about a year younger than the rest of their peers admitted into the program. Perhaps that speaks to the culture of giving a lot of responsibilities very quickly in that career as a strategy consultant. When you contrasted with tech, there was a lot more movement, people perhaps that had worked at 2 or 3 companies. And in financial services, that was starkly evident. Out of about 44 individuals that had worked at Goldman, less than half were still with Goldman Sachs when they successfully applied to the business school. And I think in part that speaks to the idea of that 3rd year of investment banking, which of course looks so much like the 2nd year, and individuals that had taken that opportunity to make a switch. They broadened their experience, and whether they've joined a private equity firm or the Obama Foundation, it was an incredibly eclectic career moves that people had then made. But clearly that will bring more experience, wider perspectives for the classroom discussion. So you can fixate on a 3.7 GPA. Of course, they're looking for smart people, the sort of academic rigor that you would expect at HBS and indeed any of the M7 schools, and a GMAT score that typically sits around the 730 level. Interestingly, nobody has an 800, so do get at least one question wrong on data sufficiency. But Harvard was a school, of course, that about 15 years ago was prepared to waive the GMAT for 2 years because the emphasis that they're then looking for on habits of leadership, it's a word that is synonymous with HBS. And I think this is where the detective work of Chad and his team, to be able to identify whether in a professional setting, whether as a member of your academic community at college, or of course, all of the many extracurriculars, community engagement, volunteer work, to be able to see how certain patterns of leadership or innovative thinking and the impact that you've had in all of those different roles really emerges. And I think this is where, as my colleagues described, they will spend so much of their time to be able to join those dots and identify the different patterns that emerge. Thinking about that collaborative culture, it's not then saying, oh, yeah, I've been working 80 hours a week for the last 3 years, I better volunteer and sort of step into the community. Volunteering to walk puppies just days, weeks before you apply to any business school is going to look shallow, calculated, cynical. So, think about your passions, perhaps picking up on something that you had done during undergrad, and then creating this arc that ties it together as you've re-engaged through mentorship or any of the number of things, but that really express the sort of patterns. Harvard loves curious people, individuals that think about how the world works. Now, that can be at a sort of a socioeconomic level. It can look at geopolitics. It can look at the fusion of finance and technology, but they love to see that thirst for learning. Research the school. It's not enough just to say, well, yeah, I'd love to do the case method. They must hear that thousands of times every year. That they really want you to take the time, but in a very thoughtful way. You won't gain any prizes for turning this into a popularity contest and saying, oh, I spoke to 27 Harvard MBAs before I applied to the program. I hope that that makes a difference. It could be 1 or 2 conversations. And think about the people that you're trying to reach out to. Maybe they're a second-year student, maybe they're a recent graduate who themselves played a leadership role during that 2 years of the HBS experience. They were the president of a particular club that aligns with your passion for artificial intelligence, wine tasting. It can be, there are so many different clubs and activities. And that conversation with Philippa, with Deepak, with Thomas, whoever it might be, that would enable you to share certain aspects of the program that really resonated with you on a far more personal level. So taking the time to really research the underlying culture and personality of the school. And I think my biggest tip for a school that says, well, we've read the resume, then we've looked at the letters of recommendation and our essay, which of course is the same essay again this year. What more should we know about you? Enjoy that question. It's not, what do they want to hear? It's what are you then looking to share? If they've already got all of this detail about your professional path, all of those bullet points that talk about your accomplishments, those critical voices of recommenders that are really sharing insights about you, not just what you do, but what makes you tick. How does your mind work? What is your value system? With those in place, recommenders are giving you the freedom to then share a far more personal story. And it's an explicit invitation from the school. What more should we know about you? Don't talk about another M&A deal or some PowerPoint slides that you put together for a very satisfied client. Talk about you, choices that you've made, a path that you've taken. And this is where my colleagues say they could always tell when someone had enjoyed this opportunity to step back and think about these different aspects, the introspection that is involved in this application, and sharing your story with your authentic voice. One of my colleagues, Daniel, who of course has great memories of the 2 years that he's spent studying those 500 cases, he talks about the absence of a word length. And he says, in many ways, this is an indirect test. In the case, you have 60 seconds to say something relevant, pertinent, worthwhile, that contributes to the discussion. Well, it's the same thing for the essay. If you offer yourself the indulgence of putting together 7 or 8 pages because you're just convinced that Harvard needs to know this about you too, and now we've got a 24th paragraph adding to the other 23, well, perhaps they would be alarmed about your ability to really be on topic when it came to those 60 seconds in the classroom. But do enjoy and do reach out to us, with my colleagues, not just from Harvard Business School. I have 40 colleagues at Fortuna that cover all of the top schools and bring that insider admissions experience that makes Fortuna so special.